Rain still clung to the streets of Denver when Officer Silas Grant opened his front door and froze. On the polished floor,
Joe,
two little girls in filthy pink
where's
dresses
Joe?
clutched each other, sobbing, "Please don't hurt us anymore." Their tiny shoulders trembled under the shadow of a stepmother's rage. In that instant, Valor the German shepherd, who never left Silas's side, let out a deep growl, as if he too understood. This was no homecoming. This was a cry for rescue and a father's moment of truth. The mansion in Denver stood tall against the fading light, its white stone facade gleaming under the drizzle that still clung to the air. The wrought iron gates creaked open as the police cruiser rolled in, its headlights sweeping across the wide driveway, lined with dormant rose bushes. Officer Silas Grant stepped out, rain-darkened boots crunching on the gravel. The man was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered from decades in uniform, his close-cropped hair now showing threads of gray. His face bore the rugged weariness of someone who had seen too many midnight crime scenes and too many families broken by violence. Yet nothing on the streets of Denver had ever prepared him for what was waiting inside his own home. Beside him leapt down Valor, his German shepherd. The dog's black and tan coat shimmered with raindrops, his amber eyes alert, ears pricked forward. Valor had been Silas's partner since the academy days, trained not only for obedience but for empathy. He had once dragged Silas from the wreckage of a collapsed warehouse during a drug raid. Since then, their bond had deepened into something unspoken, a brotherhood. As Silas unlocked the heavy oak doors of his mansion, Valor pressed against his leg, sensing a tension in his handler's heartbeat before the man himself understood it. The grand hall greeted them with silence. Crystal chandeliers glowed faintly above the marble floor, their golden light bouncing across the walls where portraits of Silas's late wife, Marissa, still hung. Her smile seemed to reach out from the canvas, a haunting reminder of the warmth once filling this house. Marissa had been radiant, her chestnut hair tumbling past her shoulders, her eyes soft with kindness. She died 6 years ago while giving birth to their twin daughters. That day, Silas's life had splintered. Grief turned him into a man of endless shifts and distant gazes, and the laughter of children became a sound he barely knew how to receive. Now, stepping into the house, he expected silence. Instead, he froze. From deeper inside came the faint, broken sobs of children, high-pitched, desperate, the kind of sound every father prays never to hear. His chest tightened as Valor's ears shot up, a low growl reverberating in the dog's throat. Silas removed his raincoat slowly, his instincts sharpening as if he were back on duty responding to a call. He followed the sound down the hallway. The closer he drew, the more distinct it became. The cries of his daughters. Ellie and Emma, identical twins of 6, were fragile mirrors of each other, though in Silas's memory, they had once been bright with laughter. They had Marissa's soft brown eyes and delicate features, but tonight they were unrecognizable. Huddled together on the carpet in the living room, their pink dresses were soiled, the fabric torn at the seams, and their small hands clutched each other as if holding on for dear life. Tears streaked down their pale cheeks as they whimpered in unison, "Please don't hurt us anymore." Standing above them was Candace Hayes, the woman Silas had trusted to help raise them. She was strikingly beautiful, her golden hair curled meticulously, lips painted crimson, a scarlet dress hugging her form. To outsiders, she was elegance incarnate. Once Marissa's closest friend, she had stepped into Silas's life like a beacon of comfort after the funeral, promising warmth to the children and stability to the grieving officer. Silas had believed her smiles, believed that his daughters needed a woman's presence. But the voice echoing through the living room was sharp and venomous. "Useless little brats," Candace spat, her tone a dagger wrapped in silk. "I told you not to make a mess. Do you want to sleep outside again? Then stop your crying." Her hand was raised, frozen midair, when Silas appeared in the doorway. The sight rooted him to the ground, his two daughters trembling, their bodies recoiling from the woman he had trusted. Valor erupted into a snarl, fur bristling, his body moving instinctively to stand between the twins and Candace. His bark cracked through the air like a gunshot, echoing off the marble walls. Ellie buried her face against Emma's shoulder. Emma's tiny fingers dug into her sister's arm. Candace flinched, her smile flickering onto her face like a mask hastily drawn. "Silas," she cooed, lowering her hand and stepping back. "You startled me. I was only disciplining them. They've been wild all day." Silas did not answer immediately. His eyes swept the room, noting the overturned toy box in the corner, the shattered porcelain vase at Candace's feet, the bruises blooming faintly along Ellie's wrist. He had trained for years to read crime scenes, to decode truths hidden in silence. And now his own home spoke louder than words. He took a step forward. The girls whimpered louder, uncertain whether to run into his arms or hide. Silas's throat tightened. For 6 years, he had told himself his absence was for their future, for the security of his badge and paycheck. But the sight before him stripped away every excuse. "Daddy!" Emma whispered, voice breaking like glass. The sound pierced him deeper than any bullet could. Candace's lips curved into a serene smile. "They've been stubborn," she said softly. "You know children, they need firmness. You've been gone so long, Silas. You wouldn't understand how they test me." She reached out as though to place a hand on his arm. Valor's growl deepened, vibrating against Silas's leg. He pulled back slightly, shaking his head. "Enough." His voice cracked with restrained fury. For a moment, Candace's mask slipped. Her blue eyes flashed with something sharp and cold, a flicker of resentment too quick for most to catch, but not for Silas and not for Valor. The dog's bark thundered again, forcing Candace to step away. Silas knelt down, reaching toward his daughters. Ellie flinched, her tiny body recoiling, as if even his hand might bring pain. That gesture, his own child afraid of him, seared into his chest. He froze mid-reach, then let his hand drop slowly, allowing Valor to move closer. The shepherd pressed his warm body against the twins, lowering his head in reassurance. Tentatively, Emma leaned into Valor's fur, and Ellie followed, their sobs muffled against the dog's steady heartbeat. Silas watched with a hollow ache. His daughters trusted the dog more than him. He stood again, his voice quieter now but steadier. "This ends tonight." Candace's smile returned, thin and sweet. "You're exhausted, Silas. You hear crying and think the worst. But I've been here every day while you were off on your noble duty." Her tone laced the word with mockery. "Don't let your guilt cloud you." But her eyes slid toward the twins, and Silas caught the silent threat in her look. He had seen that same look in interrogations predators who spoke softly while twisting the knife deeper. A wave of guilt surged in him. He had failed to protect them for too long. Marissa's voice seemed to echo from the walls. "Believe in their eyes, Silas. They cannot lie when they are afraid." The storm outside rattled the windows. Inside, the tension coiled tighter than the air before lightning. Silas knew this was only the beginning, that tonight's revelation was pulling back the curtain on a truth long hidden. He looked at his daughters, still clinging to Valor, and silently vowed that whatever came next, they would never beg for mercy again. Dinner did not arrive with warmth, it arrived with calculation. Silas told himself it would be easier to see clearly if everything looked ordinary, so he let the evening unfold as ritual. Lights lowered to a soft amber, the long oak table set with china. Marissa had chosen years ago, steam rising from a pot of chicken soup that fogged the edges of the silver ladle like breath on a winter pane. He kept his uniform shirt on, badges dulled by drizzle, radio clipped silent at his hip, as if the presence of the badge might steady his hands. Valor lay in a sphinx at the end of the table, forelegs straight, tail still, ears forward. To a stranger he was a statue, but Silas knew that beneath the stillness, the dog's eyes were reading the room the way a violinist listens for a false note. Ellie and Emma sat side by side on the bench opposite their father, two small mirrors in frayed pink dresses. In better years, they had been easy to tell apart. Emma, a little taller, had a dimple that flashed when she laughed. Ellie, left-handed, drew birds on every scrap of paper she could find. Tonight both carried a sameness forged by fierce shoulders, tight, chins tucked, eyes sweeping the doorway between spoonfuls as if expecting weather to thunder through it. Candace glided in and out of the kitchen with a hostess's smile and a metronome's poise. At 29, Denver-born, white, With salon blonde hair and winter glass eyes, she fit the city's gloss palottes, curated charity galas, polite laughter in rooms that smelled of new leather. She placed a small slice of roasted chicken onto each girl's plate, fingertips resting a fraction too long on Ellie's shoulder, pressure disguised as care. "Eat, sweetheart," she murmured, the words shaped like a lullaby, the grip tightened by a hidden winch. Silas watched, the way he watched suspects from a half-turn angle, never head-on, always letting silence make room for truth. Ellie's sleeve shifted when she lifted her spoon. That was when he saw it again. The faint sickle-shaped bruises ringing her small wrist, yellowing at the edges, the center still purple like thunderheads refusing to break. The spoon trembled, tapped the bowl, chimed a thin alarm that no one acknowledged. Valor's ear flicked. "Rough playground?" Silas asked lightly, voice pitched low so the question could wear a sweater instead of a badge. Ellie, startled, glanced at Emma, then at the place on the table where the chandelier left a bright coin of light. "I know, Daddy," she said, consonants careful, as if the wrong syllable might pull a trap door. Candace laughed softly from the sideboard, an airy sound that evaporated quickly. "Oh, the usual tumbles," she said. "They're 6. They fly like sparrows." She set a glass of milk down with the precision of a dealer laying a card, then smoothed the napkin at Ellie's elbow, the way one might smooth dirt over a root. Silas swallowed soup that tasted of rosemary and regret. He shifted his gaze to Emma. She held her spoon steady, but her throat worked twice before she could swallow. When the pot roast arrived, the room grew quieter still. Conversation became about nothing. Weather, a school art project that Candace described so brightly it left no room for a child to add color, a new fence the gardener recommended. All the while, Valor's eyes tracked the choreography, where the hands went, how the shoulders rose and fell, which voice hovered above which head. Then a thin sound cut the surface. Not a wail, not yet, but a high, trapped note. Emma's eyes had filled and spilled without warning. It wasn't dramatic. It was the small, uncontrollable overflow that happens when the day has been a long shore holding back a tide. She put her spoon down and pressed her lips together, and the tears kept coming anyway. Candace was there first, swift and neat, lifting the child under the arms in a motion that was efficient rather than tender. "Hush," she said, the hush knifed clean of comfort. Emma stiffened and cried harder, the sound pitched upward like a wire drawn too tight. Silas rose before he knew he was rising. "I've got her," he said, and for a heartbeat Candace didn't let go, a tug-of-war that was all wrists and no rope. Valor stood, body angled between them by instinct. Then Candace loosened her grip with a gracious little nod, as if granting permission to a visiting uncle. Emma folded against Silas's chest like a bird that had forgotten how to fly, her breath stuttering against the fabric of his shirt. He had spent 6 years running into burning rooms that belonged to other people. Here, in his own home, he found that the hardest rescue was learning how to hold. He swayed slightly, the old cadence he used to calm infants resurfacing from a part of himself he'd boarded up the day Marissa died. "You're all right," he said, voice low enough to be a secret. "You're all right. I'm here." Emma's sobs fell a half step lower, more breath than sound now. Across the table, Ellie watched with a look that was not quite hope, but no longer only fear. She slid her bowl toward Valor, whispering, "It's too hot," and Valor, gentleman soldier, touched the porcelain with his nose, and then looked at Silas, a silent request for permission to remain where he stood. Silas nodded. Dinner resumed in small motions. Candace poured more milk, the stream steady, the smile steady, everything steady except her eyes, which flicked a hawk's triangle from Silas to Emma to the knife on the breadboard as if calculating the angles of a story. When the plates had been taken to the sink and the girls were coaxed to the couch with a quilt that smelled faintly of lemon oil and old summers, an old woman came from the kitchen doorway, steps so quiet that the house seemed to breathe her into the room rather than admit her. Mrs. Alma Whitaker, 62, African-American, hair silvered and braided under a navy kerchief, had been with the family since Marissa first came through the door, with a vase of peonies and a laugh you could hang your coat on. She wore a neat gray cardigan and soft-soled shoes, and on Sundays sang alto in a church whose pews had known her since girlhood. In her hands tonight was a folded towel, nothing at all and everything. She met Silas's eyes for half a second, and in that half second she said an encyclopedia without a single word. I see, I know, be careful. Keep your voice low. I will stand if you stand. She placed the towel on the stair banister, as if that were where towels always went, and returned to the kitchen with a gait that could have belonged to any grandmother carrying cider. Silas felt gratitude rise sharp and quick in his throat. Mrs. Whitaker's life had been shaped by rooms where women held families together with a few coins and a hymn. Her husband, a bus driver from Five Points, had died in the first winter of the pandemic. Since then, she had held on to the small heavens she could carve her clean counters, warm bread, and the unblinking duty of telling the truth when truth had smaller hands than lies. Candace reappeared with hot cocoa like a commercial and tucked the quilt tighter around the twins, her fingers skimming Ellie's wrist with a lightness that was more threat than touch. Bed after this, she said, music in her voice, ice underneath. Silas moved through the motions of clearing plates, his mind scoring the evening like a case file. He noted what the girls ate, little, which hand lifted the spoon, Ellie's left shaking. The moments when Candace's voice thinned or thickened, when Valor's hackles prickled then smoothed. He noted that the only times the twins' shoulders relaxed were when the dog's flank pressed against their knees or when his Silas's shadow fell across them as he stood. The cocoa was finished, bedtime was suggested, and a fragile peace took the shape of routine. Upstairs, the hallway held the smell of linen and lemon, the portraits dimmed to silhouettes. Silas walked the girls to their room while Candace drifted behind, footsteps soft, perfume crisp. At the door, she kissed the crowns of the twins' heads with a mother's choreography. "Sleep tight, angels," she said. Angels winced. Silas lingered, tucking the quilt once more, inventing a reason to check the window latch, and inventing another to adjust the lamp. He left the door ajar. In the landing light, he saw the towel on the banister again, square edges aligned, a sentinel. He descended 2 steps and then froze, because a voice rose through the barely open crack behind him, too sharp to be lullaby, too soft to be heard by anyone but the person meant to hear it. "Listen to me," Candace whispered. "If you say one word to your father, you and your sister will learn how cold the back porch is at midnight." There was a pause, the small sound of a breath being held and not released. "Do you understand?" Ellie's answer was the kind of yes that isn't a yes at all. It was the sound a child makes when the world is too heavy for her ribs. Valor, stretched at the top of the stairs like a dark rug, lifted his head and let out a low thread of sound. No bark, not even a growl, more like a humming line that said, "I heard her. I am here." Silas did not storm the room. It would have been the easiest thing he had done all night, and the least wise. He closed his eyes, gripped the railing until the wood pressed crescent moons into his palm, and made a different choice. He would gather proof and pull this poison out by the root, not merely cut the leaves. He walked to his study, a room lined with case books and framed medals, and sat and let the weight in his chest teach him how to breathe without breaking. On the desk sat a small wooden box Marissa had kept, a reliquary of ticket stubs and old Polaroids and tiny felt hearts that the twins had once glued together with crooked pride. He opened it and found beneath a scalloped program from a spring concert a photograph of Marissa holding 2 newborns. She looked exhausted and beatific, hair matted to her temples, smile glowing anyway. On the back in her looping hand, "If you are ever lost, look into their eyes. They will point you home." He pressed the photo flat against the desk as if that might smooth time. Below the study door, a shadow paused, a pair of soft-soled shoes, and then slipped away. A minute later, a whisper at the threshold. "Officer?" Mrs. Whitaker didn't enter until he said, "Come in." She stepped over the sill, folded her hands, and kept her gaze steadied not on his face but on a point a little to the left, as if to spare him the weight of being seen. "Sir," she said, voice low, live oak steady, "I can't sleep easy knowing what I know. I won't speak out of turn, but if you ask me straight, I will answer straight. She was a woman who had taught fourth graders in a church basement once, who knew the difference between tattling and testimony. Silas nodded. Not yet. Soon. Thank you. She inclined her head, left a second towel on the corner of his desk, an old signal from a training she and Marissa had attended on how to communicate under someone's watchful eye, and withdrew. The house quieted to the small sounds of night. Furnace breathing, pipes ticking, a branch tapping the window. Then a different sound came, the soft clink of metal on wood. Silas stood and moved silently to the hallway. The lamp there had been turned off. He flicked it back on and saw the girl's door closed from the outside, a slide lock just now slipping into place. A second later, footsteps retreated like a cat on carpet. Valor rose without command. Silas lifted the latch, opened the door, and there were Ellie and Emma on the floor in their socks, quilt half dragged with them, eyes wide and glittering in the thin light. It's cold, Emma whispered, a statement, not a complaint. It won't be, Silas answered. He gathered them, one on each arm, the way a man learns to carry groceries alone when he never expected to. They smelled of cocoa and laundry and the tinny edge of fear. He took them to his room, settled them on the bed, tucked the quilt, set a glass of water within reach. Valor lay across the doorway, chin on paws, not sleeping, not blinking. Tonight, Silas said, keeping his voice the same temperature as a hand on a fevered brow. You sleep here. I'll be right next to you. Emma nodded and slid one small foot until it touched his leg, as children do to confirm a promise is real. Ellie stared at the ceiling for a long time, and then turned toward him, eyes searching his face for a verdict only fathers can deliver. He didn't say everything. He said enough. No one will hurt you, he said, and let the sentence hang like a lantern. In the hush that followed, a vow took shape, not the kind men make at podiums, but the kind that seals itself in the body. Outside, the rain eased. Inside, the gears of a new morning began to align. Evidence would be gathered. A friend who loved the law more than he loved invitations would be called, and whatever this house had become would be undone, beam by beam, until it remembered how to be a home. The night stretched long, heavy with unsaid vows and the sound of shallow breaths from the two girls curled beneath Silas's quilt. He sat awake in a chair beside them, Valor stretched across the doorway like a sentinel, the rise and fall of his chest steady as a drumbeat of loyalty. Rain had stilled outside, leaving the world damp and reflective under the Denver moon. For hours, Silas remained unmoving, replaying Candace's whispers, the bruises on Ellie's wrist, Emma's sobs, the towel on the stair rail, the lock sliding on the outside of the children's door. He felt like a man watching a crime scene unspool in his own house. Except here, his badge was useless unless he first reclaimed the role he had too long abandoned. Father. When dawn brushed pale light across the curtains, Silas rose. He tucked the quilt tighter around the twins, brushed their foreheads with a touch that startled him by its own unfamiliarity, and stepped into the hall. Valor padded silently behind him, nails clicking lightly against the wood. Silas made his way to the study, a room still scented faintly of old tobacco and lemon polish. On the far wall stood a cabinet of drawers Marissa had once used for stationery, cards, and keepsakes. His hand paused on the brass handle, his chest heavy with memory. He opened the bottom drawer, rummaging through bundles of faded papers. Beneath a stack of children's finger paintings folded neatly lay a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges. His heart stumbled. The handwriting across the front was unmistakable, Marissa's slanted script, both firm and graceful. To Silas. He sat at the desk, fingers trembling as he tore it open. The paper crackled softly, as though reluctant to reveal its secret. Her words were simple, but they struck like bells tolling from across time. If I am no longer here, please protect Ellie and Emma. Do not place your trust too quickly in anyone's smile, no matter how sweet it may seem. Believe in the eyes of your children. When they are afraid, they will not know how to lie. The breath left Silas's lungs. He pressed the letter flat, staring at the ink until it blurred. Marissa's voice seemed to whisper from the margins, not accusing, but urging. He lowered his head into his hands, grief and resolve crashing like two rivers. All the years he had buried himself in patrol shifts and case files, pretending distance equaled duty, suddenly mocked him. He rose slowly, folding the letter with care, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his uniform shirt, close enough to feel against his heart. It would stay there until the day he had restored what he had broken. Valor whined softly, nudging his leg, and Silas bent to press his forehead briefly against the shepherd's. "We won't fail them again," he whispered. Valor's tail thudded once against the floor, a solemn oath sealed. That evening, after routine hours passed in shadows and whispers, Silas stood by the kitchen window, watching the back garden where damp grass glistened under a thin beam of moonlight. The twins were asleep upstairs. Mrs. Whitaker had retired early, but Candace had not come to bed. Silas felt it first in Valor's posture, the sudden tension, ears pricked, nose raised to the faint shift of air. The dog gave a low, vibrating growl and moved to the door. Silas followed. He opened the back door quietly, the night air cool against his face. In the garden near the rose trellis, Candace stood, her posture less polished now, sharp with impatience. Opposite her was a man Silas had never seen before. Tall, in his late 30s, white, with thinning blonde hair slicked neatly, a sharp nose and glasses that flashed when he tilted his head. His navy coat fell stiff to his knees, and he clutched a leather folder tight against his side. There was something predatory in the way he held himself, a man who had built his career on exploiting shadows. Silas recognized the type immediately. He had interrogated men like this in fraud investigations, ones who smiled like bankers, but bit like wolves. Candace's voice carried just enough for Silas to catch fragments. "Derek, I can't wait forever. The Walker Trust is locked under his signature. I need access before the quarter ends." The man Derek Caldwell leaned in. He was a lawyer with a reputation whispered about in Denver's downtown circles, known for clever loopholes, known for making fortunes appear in the right hands and disappear from others. He spoke in a low, measured rhythm, the kind a viper might use to lull. "You've married into the key, Candace, but signatures, those are stubborn. If he doesn't delegate power of attorney, our hands are tied." Candace hissed under her breath. "He won't, not willingly. But there are ways. He's distracted with the children. He's guilty for being gone. I'll find leverage." Valor growled louder now, the sound deep as distant thunder. Silas laid a hand on the dog's neck. Grateful, the warning had allowed him to step closer without being heard. He crouched behind the hedges, heart hammering. Every word thickened the portrait. Not only cruelty to his daughters, but betrayal entwined with greed. Derek shifted, checked his watch. 2 weeks, no longer. After that, scrutiny increases. I can't keep doors open forever. Candace smoothed her hair, her beauty brittle under the moonlight. 2 weeks is enough. Trust me. They clasped hands quickly, shadows meeting like conspirators. Then Derek vanished through the side gate. Candace lingered, smoothing her dress, practicing a smile in the reflection of the garden's glass door before returning inside. Silas remained hidden a moment longer. Valor pressed against his leg, the dog's steady weight grounding him. He clenched his fists, forcing himself not to storm after her. Fury without proof would cost him his daughters. He needed evidence, witness, strategy. He needed to be more than a policeman. He needed to be a father sharpened by truth. Back inside, Silas returned to his study. He opened a case notebook, one he had used for homicide details years ago, and began writing. The first entry was Marissa's letter. The second, Candace, meeting in garden, 11:45 p.m. Subject Derek Caldwell, lawyer. Discussed Walker Trust, time frame 2 weeks. He added every detail he remembered. Tone, body language, words. Valor curled beneath the desk, eyes still alert, as if aware that tonight marked the beginning of something far larger. Later, Silas checked on the twins. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly, her hand reaching instinctively for Ellie's. Silas smoothed their blanket and whispered to the dark, "Your mother told me to believe in your eyes. I saw the fear, and now I'll see you safe." Shaw glanced toward the hallway where Valor waited like a shadow of devotion, then back at his daughters. "This ends with truth." Morning broke sharp and brittle. the kind of winter light that stripped color from the streets of downtown Denver. Silas parked his car a block away from the family court building, the twins seated quietly in the back. Ellie held Emma's hand so tightly that both knuckles whitened, their pink coats buttoned up to their chins. Valor sat upright beside them, his amber eyes steady, his presence a wall between them and the world. The courthouse loomed ahead, all stone columns and glass doors, austere as if built to remind people that truth could not be bent by charm. Silas adjusted his tie. He had worn the uniform in countless trials as an officer testifying, but today he came not as a badge, but as a father. The distinction pressed on him heavier than any bulletproof vest. Beside the steps stood Richard Coleman, his attorney. Richard was in his mid-40s, tall and lean, with graying black hair cut close at the sides and glasses perched neatly on his straight nose. His suits were tailored but practical, dark gray with narrow lapels, the look of a man who cared less about fashion than about clarity. He had grown up in a blue-collar suburb of Denver, the son of a schoolteacher and a postal worker, and he carried with him the ethic of those roots discreet, persistent, unshaken. Richard had built a career handling complicated family trust cases and custody disputes, always known for precision and a certain blunt kindness that clients clung to in the storm. He greeted Silas with a firm handshake, then crouched briefly to Valor's level, scratching behind the dog's ear. "Ready to help us in court, partner?" Valor blinked once, steady and calm. Ellie and Emma both pressed closer to the shepherd's flank, and Richard gave Silas a small nod. This bond between dog and children was proof enough of where safety truly lived. Inside, the courtroom hummed with restrained tension. Families came and went, voices hushed, the scent of stale coffee mixing with old wood polish. Judge Eleanor Myers, a woman in her early 50s, with sharp eyes behind thin-frame spectacles, presided over the session. She was known across Denver for her unbending fairness, never cruel, never soft. Her hair was a sweep of iron gray pulled into a bun, her robes falling cleanly across her shoulders. She had once worked for a nonprofit advocating for children's rights before ascending to the bench, and her presence was both steadying and severe. Candace entered moments later. She wore a navy dress and a pearl necklace, her makeup light, her eyes red-rimmed as though from tears. At her side walked Alan Pierce, a defense attorney in his late 30s with slick-back hair, a crisp blue suit, and a grin honed from years of courtroom sparring. Alan was ambitious, hungry for recognition, and known for exploiting loopholes. He had defended landlords in eviction disputes and corporations in labor claims. To him, cases were chessboards, and empathy was a piece easily sacrificed. The hearing began. Richard rose, his voice measured but resonant. "Your Honor, we are here to request an emergency protection order on behalf of Ellie and Emma Grant, 6 years old, who have been subjected to repeated emotional and physical abuse by their stepmother, Candace Hayes. We will present testimony, photographic evidence, and a letter left by the late Marissa Grant, mother of the children, which sheds context on the threats they face." Alan stood swiftly, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, the claims are exaggerated. My client has been the sole caregiver during Mr. Grant's extended absences. She has done her best under difficult circumstances, and we will demonstrate that the accusations arise from guilt and misunderstanding rather than fact." The judge raised a hand. "We will hear the witnesses." Richard called Mrs. Whitaker first. The elderly housekeeper entered the stand slowly, her cardigan buttoned neatly, her hands clasped tightly. She spoke in a calm, clear tone. "I've worked for the Grant family since Mrs. Marissa was alive. I've seen the girls forced to stand outside in the cold as punishment. One night I found them asleep in the storage room, clutching each other because their bedroom had been locked. I've seen their little brother given watered-down milk until he cried himself to sleep." Her voice caught slightly, but she held steady. "And I heard Mrs. Hayes tell them if they told their father, she would throw them both into the street." Alan leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitaker, you're 62, correct? Could your memory have been mistaken? Perhaps confused in the dark?" She straightened. "Number, I do not mistake a child's cries, and I do not mistake a threat." Richard presented photographs, faint purple bruises on Ellie's wrist. Time-stamped, taken discreetly by Mrs. Whitaker. The judge studied them in silence. Then Richard asked Ellie to step forward. The little girl looked frozen, her tiny hands twisting the hem of her dress. Silas bent down, whispered gently, "You don't have to, only if you want." She looked into his eyes, then at Valor, who padded forward and lay beside the witness chair. When Ellie sat down, Valor lowered his head onto her lap. The weight of his presence steadied her trembling. In a small, cracked voice, Ellie spoke. She said, "If I told Daddy, she would throw me and Emma out into the street. But I can't stay quiet. I don't want my sister to be scared anymore." The courtroom stilled. Even Judge Myers leaned forward slightly, her expression softening just enough to acknowledge the child's courage. Alan tried to interject. "Children can be impressionable, Your Honor." But the judge silenced him with a glance. Candace dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her voice breaking as she stood. "Your Honor, I only tried to discipline them like any mother would. Silas was never home. I carried the whole weight of this family. Perhaps I was strict, but I never—" Her words broke into sobs, her performance convincing enough to make a murmur ripple through the room. Richard stepped forward again. "Your Honor, we present this letter." He handed the folded note to the clerk, who brought it to the bench. Judge Myers read silently, her lips pressing into a thin line. The letter from Marissa, its plea to protect Ellie and Emma, its warning against trusting a false smile hung heavy in the chamber. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Candace snapped. Her voice sharpened, her mask cracking under pressure. "Do you all think Marissa was perfect? That saintly woman everyone adored? She's gone, and I was left with her children, her shadow. Do you know what it's like to be compared to her every day?" Her words spiraled louder, her face contorted, the carefully painted mask of sorrow peeling away. Gasps filled the courtroom. Alan reached for her sleeve, whispering urgently, but she pulled away, her eyes wild. "They were never mine. I never wanted them. And yet I had to carry their screams, their whining." She stopped herself too late. The judge's gavel struck, sharp as thunder. "Enough." Silas sat frozen, Ellie clutching Valor's ears, Emma crying softly against his arm. Richard straightened, his calm voice slicing the tension. "Your Honor, the mask has dropped. The evidence stands." Judge Myers nodded slowly, her eyes sweeping the room. "This court finds sufficient cause. Effective immediately, custody rights of Mrs. Candace Hayes are suspended. Full guardianship is granted to Officer Silas Grant. Furthermore, the testimony of financial misconduct and the letter presented warrant an investigation into the Walker Trust. This matter will be referred to the district attorney's office." Her gavel fell once more. "This hearing is adjourned." Candace slumped into her seat, eyes burning with venom, but no performance left to save her. Silas rose, gathering Ellie and Emma into his arms, Valor close by his side. For the first time in years, the weight in his chest lifted not entirely, but enough to breathe as a father again. 2 years slipped by with the rhythm of seasons, each one carrying the family further from the shadows of the courtroom and closer to the sunlight of something like peace. The house in Denver, once filled with silence and dread, had found a new voice. The laughter of 2 growing girls and the steady bark of a German shepherd who never missed a step. On a soft spring morning, the garden behind the house bloomed in full color. Rows of rose bushes stretched beneath the open sky, each plant rooted in soil Silas himself had turned with his bare hands. A wooden sign carved by his calloused fingers read Marissa's Rose Garden. The letters were painted white, outlined by Ellie and Emma with childish care, their brush strokes uneven but radiant with love. It stood as a monument not only to the woman he had lost, but also to the promise he had finally kept. Ellie and Emma were now 8, their faces fuller, their limbs longer, no longer fragile reeds but saplings stretching upward. They still wore pink, though now the dresses were fresh and chosen by themselves, often grass-stained by play. Emma carried a watering can almost as tall as her torso, giggling as she nearly tipped it onto her shoes. Ellie knelt in the dirt, her brow furrowed as she tied a stake to support a young rose, tongue poking slightly from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Valor bounded between them, coat glistening under the morning light. barking once in delight before rolling onto his back in the patch of grass they had claimed as their playfield. His muzzle had begun to silver, but his eyes burned as brightly as ever. For the girls, he was more than a dog. He was guardian, playmate, and confidant. When storms rolled in, Valor was the first body they leaned against. When joy overflowed, he was the first to receive their embraces. Silas sat on a wooden chair near the fence, watching. His shoulders, once perpetually tight with duty, now sloped in quiet relief. He wore a plain shirt rolled at the sleeves, his badge long retired to the drawer, replaced by the tools of fatherhood: bandages for scraped knees, a steady hand for shoelaces, a voice ready to read bedtime stories. As he gazed at his daughters, his mind drifted inevitably to Marissa. He saw her in Ellie's cautious patience, in Emma's bursts of laughter, in the way both girls bent toward each other like twin vines twining for strength. He whispered inwardly, "I kept my promise. They're safe. They're blooming." The garden was not only roses. Tomatoes grew in neat rows, strawberries peeked from green leaves, and daisies dotted the edges like sunlight made solid. It was a place of healing, where every new bud felt like testimony that wounds could be covered with petals. Inside the house, Mrs. Alma Whitaker moved slowly through the kitchen. At 64 now, her hair more silver than black, she had chosen to remain with the Grants even after the legal battles ended. To Ellie and Emma, she was more than housekeeper. She was Grandma Alma, her soft voice always ready with a hymn or a story from her childhood in Denver's Five Points. Alma had faced poverty in her early years, had buried a husband too soon, but had always built strength through community and church. Now she poured that strength into the twins, guiding them gently, never raising her voice but letting wisdom settle like dew. She carried a tray of butter cookies to the back porch, calling out in her warm drawl, "Milk and sweets, girls. Don't trample Daddy's roses before you wash up." The twins rushed toward her, Valor thudding close behind, hopeful for crumbs. Alma shook her head with mock sternness. "Cookies aren't for dogs, Mr. Valor. You'll get your biscuit." She slipped him one anyway, patting his flank. Later that afternoon, Richard Coleman arrived. His presence had become regular, not only as lawyer, but as friend. He was still lean, his graying hair brushed back, spectacles perched firmly. He carried a folder under one arm, but more often than not, his visits were less about law and more about company. Richard had never married, and though he rarely spoke of it, Silas suspected the courtroom had consumed too much of him. In this household, however, he allowed himself small indulgences, listening to Emma's elaborate retellings of fairy tales, sampling Alma's cookies, or helping Ellie practice the careful logic of chess. This day, Richard sat on the porch with Silas, sipping coffee. They spoke of small things: the garden, the girls' schooling, the Denver Broncos' latest season. At one point, Richard set his cup down and looked toward the roses. "You've built something here, Silas. Not everyone gets a second chance to keep a promise." Silas nodded, unable to answer with words. Valor stretched at his feet, sighing contentedly as if affirming the truth of it. As dusk fell, fireflies winked over the garden. The girls bathed, then padded into the living room in pajamas dotted with stars. Silas pulled them close on the couch, reading from one of Marissa's old storybooks. His voice was deep, steady, and the twins leaned against him, drowsy and safe. Valor lay at his feet, his head resting on Silas's boot, a silent guard. Alma hummed softly from the kitchen, her tune an old gospel song of resilience. When bedtime came, Silas carried each girl upstairs, laying them side by side. He pulled the blanket to their chins, kissed their foreheads. Valor climbed onto the rug by the bed, chin flat, eyes alert. Emma whispered, "Night, Daddy." "Night, Valor." Ellie added, "Good night, Mama," her gaze flicking toward the framed photograph on the dresser. Silas swallowed hard, turned out the light, and lingered at the door until their breathing deepened. In the silence of his own room, Silas opened the drawer where Marissa's letter lay preserved. He read it again, as he had countless times, but tonight he did not weep. Tonight he simply placed it back with reverence and looked out at the garden, where roses glowed faintly in the moonlight. "I did it, Marissa," he whispered. "We did it." Peace did not mean forgetting the scars, but it meant the scars no longer ruled the house. With Alma's steadfast care, Richard's loyal friendship, and Valor's eternal vigilance, the home had been rebuilt, not of stone and glass, but of love, justice, and the stubborn endurance of family. When a father finally chose to listen, two frightened little girls found their voices again, and a home once filled with shadows learned to bloom in light. This story reminds us that justice and love must walk hand in hand, and that loyalty, whether from a faithful dog or a steadfast heart, can change the course of a life. Tell me in the comments which moment touched you the most. Was it Ellie's courage in court, Valor's silent protection, or Silas whispering to Marissa's memory that he had kept his promise? If this story moved you, please like this video and follow the channel so we can continue sharing more journeys of healing, hope, and the power of family.